At Christmas, my own father blocked the doorway to our family home and told me I was no longer his child. His voice was ice, but the real cut came from the sight of his wife smirking right behind him, enjoying every second. I'd been invited for dinner only to be humiliated in front of everyone. But I didn't beg and I didn't break. I walked to my car, dialed one number, and within minutes, every guest at that table, his friends, his allies got up and left. That was the night they tried to erase me from my own bloodline and instead exposed just how much power I had left. My name is Lachlan Wren, and I'm about to share the full story. Before I do, can you say hi in the comments or let me know where you're watching from? I love seeing how far my story can reach. It's a reminder I'm not standing in this alone. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe. Your support helps me keep speaking the truth. And maybe it means no one else will have to face the kind of betrayal I did. Especially not from their own family. The marble steps up to my father's Belmead mansion gleamed like ice under the soft glow of the lanterns. A sharp December wind knifed through my coat, carrying with it the metallic tang of frost. Behind the massive iron doors, warm light spilled from crystal chandeliers, and the muffled strains of a string quartet drifted into the night. Carols meant to soften edges and mask intent. I told myself, stay calm, watch, don't let them write your reaction. My hand tightened briefly around the keys in my pocket, the small gardening knife dangling from the ring, pressing against my palm, a habit from years of keeping tools close. Victor filled the doorway before I could cross the threshold. Tailored black suit crisp against the white marble. His expression was carved from stone. You're not family anymore, he said, each word measured and cold. Turn around and leave. Behind him, Camille's low, satisfied laugh slipped past his shoulder like smoke, her hand resting lightly on Lachlan's arm. Lachlan's eyes met mine, steady and laced with the kind of smugness that comes from knowing the game is stacked in your favor. I didn't argue, didn't give them the scene they wanted. I simply nodded once, a small sharp movement, and turned away. My gaze flickered to the seating chart tucked into a carved alcove by the door. My name was there, then crossed through with a faint deliberate smudge. The guest list wasn't an invitation. It was bait. By the time I reached my truck in the long tree-lined drive, the air felt less cold, more clear. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and dialed from the console. The name lit up on the screen. S. Drake Direct. Start, I said when Sterling picked up. Already ready, he replied, his voice flat, unsurprised. He'd seen this coming. Through the windshield, one of the estate security men watched me with the patient anticipation of someone expecting a blow-up. I met his stare, then turned the key, breathing steady. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement in the golden windows, guests rising from their seats almost in unison, a murmur swelling, then spilling into confusion. Waitstaff hesitated mid-step, their trays tilting. The quartet's music faltered and stopped. 5 minutes later, the dining room was nearly empty. The trap they'd set for me had snapped on empty air. I shifted into drive, the road toward East Nashville opening in the headlights. Now it's my turn to set the table. Franklin, Tennessee. My mother's old house smelled faintly of cedar and damp earth in winter. I was 10 when she crouched beside me in the garden one icy night, showing me how to work compost into the soil. Trees survive the wind because of their roots, she'd said, brushing dirt from her gloves. That stayed with me. Strength drawn from what's beneath the surface. Unseen, but unshakable. Victor remarried within 2 years of her funeral. The first dinner with Camille and her son was a study in reorganization. Lachlan sat beside Victor, Camille at the head of the table. I was placed at a smaller side table, the kind usually reserved for children or overflow guests. The message was subtle but deliberate. It only got clearer with time. Invitations to family events came late or not at all. At Christmas, my chair would be missing from the main dining room. A framed portrait of the new family hung in the center of the foyer. Victor, Camille, Lachlan. My absence as obvious as the chandelier overhead. When Victor invited me to design the landscape for a luxury development, the plans revealed it would bulldoze the Edge Hill community garden I'd helped establish. I refused. Not for money. Not for prestige. Not for him. You're a traitor to your own blood, Victor had snapped in his office. Glass walls framing the city skyline like a trophy. Camille didn't even look at me when she added, he's simply not cut out for our level. That was the day I walked out of the Cade company for good, turning freelance, building my own network from the ground up. A year later at a downtown gala, Camille smiled sweetly in front of one of Victor's biggest investors and asked, still planting flowers for rich people? The laughter that followed was light, but it cut deep. I left before dessert and didn't take their calls after. What they didn't know What I never mentioned was that I'd been working quietly with the city's planning board to protect the Edge Hill Gardens from developers. One commissioner owed me a favor, one I suspected I might need someday. Driving past the twinkling storefronts of East Nashville that Christmas night, I glanced down at my calloused hands on the steering wheel. Those weren't the hands Victor had shaped, but my mother's, rooted in work that mattered, steady enough to weather any storm. A week before Christmas, my phone lit up with Victor's name while I was sanding a walnut shelf in my East Nashville loft. I let it ring twice, wiped sawdust from my hands, and answered on speaker. "Let's put the past aside," he said, voice warm like a salesman's handshake. "We're having a small private dinner on Christmas. Sterling will be there. A few investors. I'd like you to come." The blade of the sander thumped to a stop. "A small dinner?" I repeated. "Steady. A family evening," he said. We were still on the line when another voice slipped through from his end. Muffled but close. Camille's low and precise. "Seat him by the door. Make sure he's isolated. Sterling will see Lachlan's the future." Lachlan answered amused. "He'll stick out like a paper napkin at a state dinner." A glass clinked. A snatch of strings. The ambient hush of moneyed people rehearsing the holidays. Victor cleared his throat, fumbled with the phone and the sound cut. I stood there with my chest hollowed out and oddly calm. The kind of calm that comes when the shape of a trap finally reveals itself. I didn't record their words. Not clearly enough to matter. But I hit the memo app and clipped the ambient cues. The glass? The room tone? The carol in the background I could match to a playlist if I had to. A timeline is a shape and shapes can hold. 2 days before the dinner. I came home late with groceries and found the wrought iron gate at my building torqued so hard the hinges groaned. The mailbox door dangled. Screws sheared clean. Inside a single card printed in block caps. "Stay in your lane." The letters weren't angry. They were tidy like a chore crossed off a list. I crouched to study the gate. Whoever did it had used a leverage bar. They'd left a crescent bite in the iron where the fulcrum dug. In the slush on the sidewalk? Deep square lug prints from a work boot that carried weight and habit. I shot photos from every angle. Timestamp and GPS on. Then moved inside. My breath smoked in the stairwell like I was still outdoors. For a minute, I stood by the kitchen island with the card in my hand and considered calling the police. Then I pictured Camille at some polished conference table telling a room full of people that I was inventing drama for attention. I could almost hear the soft chorus of sympathetic clucks. The point of the damage wasn't the metal. It was the story I might tell about it. I slid the card into a zip bag and texted the building's head of security. An old friend who worked nights and trusted facts over noise. He pulled footage from the lobby cameras. The angle at the gate was a blind spot. But at 1:17 a.m., a dark contractor's pickup eased past the front. The same making decal I'd seen countless times outside Victor's job sites. He sent me the still. Not proof. Not yet. Enough to keep me steady. That night, I spread a legal pad on the table and listed the choices. Show up at the dinner and be framed as ungrateful. Abrasive. Small. Stay home and feed the narrative that I was thin-skinned and weak. Either way, I was supposed to be a prop. I flipped the page and drew the plan I could live with. I would set a real table in the loft. Oak slab I'd built myself. My mother's china. Cloth napkins folded the way she taught me. Turkey rubbed with rosemary and orange zest. Mashed potatoes beaten glossy with butter and cream. Green beans I'd blanched and froze from the fall. Apple pie that made the whole place smell like a memory. Jazz standards for December humming low through the speakers. Place cards hand-lettered for the names I predicted would be on Victor's list. Not to prove anything. To offer something his dinner could not. If the show in Belle Meade turned into what they planned, all I needed was a reason for the important people to stand up and follow a different current. I set my phone to save all incoming calls automatically. Legal in Tennessee for a one-party record. I wasn't interested in broadcasting anyone's words. I was interested in not being rewritten later. In a shoebox? I kept photos from old holidays. Last year's dinner seating chart was there. An image I'd grabbed with my phone while a server reset the stand. I enlarged it on my laptop and found my name placed by the door across from the service station where plates clatter and people don't linger. A showcase seat. In the next file, a photo of the current year's chart I'd snapped earlier that night in the alcove of the mansion. My name faintly entered then neatly struck through. Not an oversight. A rehearsed reveal. I texted Sterling. If they turn me into an object lesson, I want the guests to see a real meal. I'll be ready. His response landed seconds later. Be ready. That was all? No pep talk. No shock. No questions. I stared at those 2 words until the screen dimmed. Then I pulled a blank card from a drawer and wrote the names I could guess in the calligraphy my mother taught me. I lined the cards down the center of the table like a path. I closed my notebook and turned off the kitchen light. The loft exhaled around me. Quiet with promise. If they needed an audience to make their point, I'd remove the audience. I slept well for the first time in a month. Morning came bright and brittle. I ran errands, brined the bird, ironed the napkins, and cued a record that always sounded like warmth. When my hands stilled, I looked down at the familiar pattern of calluses across my palms. Earned not in Victor's glass towers, but in soil, sawdust, and the long work of building something that lasts. The card in the zip bag sat on the counter where I could see it. I let it sit there like a dare, then slid it into a drawer and went back to arranging the candles. If a storm was coming, I wanted my house in order. At 7 sharp on Christmas night, the front doors of the Belmead mansion opened, and a hush rippled through the ballroom as I crossed the threshold. The chandeliers burned honey over the polished table set for 20. The quartet in the corner shifted from "Hark the Herald Angels Sing" to something lighter, more ornamental. Faces turned, a few tilted toward each other and murmured, "You can hear your name even when no one speaks it." Camille's gaze fell to my shoes. Plain leather, clean, but not couture, and flicked back up with a smile? Trained to cut without leaving a mark. Lachlan lifted his champagne and took a slow sip, as if toasting a moment he'd been promised. My place card waited at the end of the table by the service door, where waiters brushed past with trays and drafts curled under the sill. The chair was a half step lower than the rest. I touched the back of it with one finger, then left it empty and stood until a server startled pulled it in for me. I thanked him and sat. Victor rose with his glass. "Friends," he began, voice smooth as a stage light. He named the guests and their titles, lifted up deals and milestones. When he reached me, he paused just long enough to make space for laughter. "And this is Orion? Who still remind me? What exactly do you do these days?" A titter carried down the table from the middle seats where people feel safest. I smiled as if I'd missed the joke and let the sound run its course. Camille leaned forward on her elbows, the diamonds at her throat catching and throwing the room's glow. "We were just talking about Edge Hill," she said brightly. "The luxury complex? You were going to design the grounds, weren't you?" Lachlan didn't wait. He walked away. "Shame. Some of us recognize a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when it shows up." I set my wine glass down with care and turned my head to find Sterling. He sat 3 seats from Victor, long frame loose, expression unreadable. His eyes met mine, in the barest acknowledgement, and then he addressed the table. "Edge Hill isn't just a footprint on a map," he said, casual as small talk. "It's a neighborhood with a garden that feeds people. Orion flagged some environmental concerns for me months ago: soil runoff, loss of permeable surface, heat island effect. Smart points." The conversation shifted like a current hitting rock. A woman in a navy sheath asked which watershed the site drained into. A man with a banker's tie wanted to know if the city had updated the code on tree canopy. Heads that had turned toward me for sport now tilted toward the substance of the project itself. Camille's smile held, but it thinned around the eyes. "We're all very proud of our adherence to regulations," she said, the word regulations dropping like a weight. Victor lifted his glass again. "Let's enjoy the meal," he said, tone firming around the edges. At his signal, servers moved with synchronized grace, setting down tiny salads and slices of smoked salmon. The quartet leaned into "O Little Town of Bethlehem." Laughter built again. A little forced, then steadied. Power prefers the familiar. I eased back in my chair and watched as the room resettled. The appetizers were perfect, gleaming with the right amount of oil, dotted with herbs likely flown in that day. My fork clicked lightly against china my mother would have loved to touch. I could feel the plan's clock winding in my pocket. Sterling reached for the bread basket, leaned closer as if commenting on the rosemary, and spoke without moving his lips. "Get ready," he murmured. "Your signal's coming." The moment Sterling caught my signal, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, but one button press had already set the sequence in motion. Sterling's phone buzzed softly, just enough for me to notice. His eyes flicked toward me in acknowledgement. He stood, offered an easy smile to the table, and murmured something about a matter that can't wait. He didn't leave alone for long. I watched from my seat as he slipped into the hallway, then returned within minutes, leaning down to speak to each of the investors Victor had invited. One by one they rose from the table, coats being fetched discreetly by the staff, murmurs breaking the polished cadence of the dinner. I didn't need to say a word. Every empty chair was doing it for me. A photographer, likely freelancing for one of the local society blogs, had started snapping shots of the sudden exodus. The muffled sound of a shutter punctuated the room like a ticking clock. Victor's jaw worked behind a polite smile, urging the remaining guests to enjoy their meals. Camille leaned toward Lachlan, her voice low but sharp. His phone appeared under the table. thumbs moving quickly. I caught the faintest glimpse of the words before he angled the screen away. Plan B. When I stood to retrieve my coat, the hallway carried Victor's voice back to me. Brittle and cold. You said he'd be humiliated tonight. Camille's reply was too faint to catch. But the tension in her tone was unmistakable. Outside, Sterling caught up to me. His breath clouded in the winter air as he spoke. You've made my position clear tonight, but understand this means they'll come at you harder now. When I returned to my loft, a square box sat just inside the door. No note, no label. Inside was a potted plant, dead, the roots yanked out, soil scattered like dust. My fingers curled around the ceramic rim. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a personal declaration of war. The next morning, the December light barely filtered through my loft's tall windows when I noticed the fresh scratch along the door frame. The lock had been tampered with, metal gouged and edges scraped. Nothing seemed missing. But my drafting table was in disarray. Blueprints and sketches shuffled like someone had been searching for something. In the middle of the mess, a plain envelope sat apart from the rest. Inside, a photo of me and my mother standing outside the old Franklin house years before she passed. No one in Victor's circle should have had this picture. The mailbox downstairs held more. A Christmas card printed with the same 3 words I'd already seen once. Stay in your lane. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I knew it instantly. Camille's lists in Victor's kitchen used the same sharp downstrokes on every Y. I called Sterling, relaying every detail. His pause on the line was brief but weighted. Their fallback plan, he said, is to spread a story that you started your career with Victor's money? Make you look like a parasite? He added that a journalist had already been fed an anonymous tip about it. That was when I reached for my last quiet advantage. Maren Holt. I'd landscaped her Brentwood property 2 years back. And in return, she told me I could call anytime I needed legal counsel. She answered on the second ring. Her voice clipped, but alert. Within the hour, Maren called me back. The number sending the tip to the paper belongs to Lachlan's assistant. Her tone flattened. This isn't random gossip. Orion. This is coordinated. I hung up knowing that this wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a deliberate campaign to erase my credibility entirely. And it was time I treated it like one. 3 days after Christmas, the Hermitage Hotel was lit like a stage. The lobby awash with the muted gold glow of antique chandeliers. Sterling had invited me to the business luncheon. And his tone casual, but I knew better. He was setting the stage. Victor didn't know I would be there. I spotted them the moment they entered. Camille in a deep red dress. Hair swept into a perfect twist. Her arm locked with Lachlan's in a display that tried too hard. Victor kept his gaze forward. But the air shifted. The low hum of conversation across the room shifted toward sharper whispers. The story about guests walking out of his Christmas dinner had made its way here. Leaked, I suspected, by one of the servers, who had witnessed the exodus firsthand. Sterling took the podium with effortless authority. His speech wasn't long, but it was precise. His praise for my Edge Hill redevelopment project framed as an example of preserving the character of Nashville while ensuring environmental accountability. I caught the sideways glances at Victor from several investors, their expressions edged with doubt. One of them, a man I knew only through brief introductions, leaned toward me at the break. You know, Victor signed Edge Hill over to Lachlan after Christmas. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but the words hit like a slap. When Maren arrived, she didn't waste time. She handed me a manila folder. Inside, printed emails from Lachlan's assistant to a journalist, complete with timestamps, subject lines, and enough detail to gut the smear campaign before it hit the page. I scanned the pages, sent Sterling a photo from my phone. He barely nodded before forwarding it to a curated list of key players in the room. Camille's phone buzzed. She excused herself, heels clicking sharply against the marble as she disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, her face was drained of color, jaw set in tight control. Lachlan, meanwhile, muttered to a man beside him, not noticing how close I stood. We didn't think he still had the original. His words stuck in my mind. As the luncheon wound down, I walked out into the brisk air with one thought turning over and over in my head. If there was an original, I needed it. And I needed it in front of Victor when there would be no way out. A week later, the ballroom at the Omni Nashville shimmered under a canopy of crystal lights. It was the real estate gala of the year, and Victor was the guest of honor. The press lined the entryway like a gauntlet. Camille clung to his arm, poised, smiling for every flash of the camera. I walked in beside Sterling and Maren. My name nowhere on the official guest list, but my seat guaranteed by Sterling's personal sponsorship. The room hummed with the sound of glasses and polite laughter until Victor took the stage. As he began his speech, Marin and I moved quietly between the tables, sliding packets in front of each guest. Inside, each the environmental damage report for Edge Hill, Victor's signed approvals, and the printed email chain from Lachlan's assistant. Halfway through his remarks, the massive LED screen behind him flickered. Then it lit up with a detailed map of soil contamination across Edge Hill, Victor's signature anchoring the corner. The silence was instant, then fractured by murmurs that grew louder with each passing second. A journalist broke from the crowd, stepping toward the stage with a microphone. "Mr. Carradine, would you care to comment on this?" His voice carried. Camille rose as if to intercept, but Marin was already there, handing her a faxed copy of the signed approval with a measured smile. Sterling's voice cut through the noise. "Effective immediately. I'm withdrawing all investment from projects under Victor Carradine's control. That capital will be redirected to Orion Vale and his initiatives." His words landed like the slam of a gavel. Another investor stood and called Victor out directly for allowing Camille and Lachlan to manipulate both strategy and execution. Victor's head turned toward me, his eyes sharp but unsteady. "You think this is winning?" he said, his voice low enough that only I heard. "I think it's defending what you taught me to value," I replied evenly. "Reputation." Camille left without a word, pulling two loyal guests behind her. Victor remained stranded on the stage, the press closing in. I left the gala knowing the balance had shifted. I'd won this round, but Lachlan's careless admission still echoed in my mind. Somewhere out there, the original was waiting, and with it, the final piece of leverage I didn't yet understand. 2 days after the gala, the gray afternoon light oversoaked through the tall windows of Marin's law office. The three of us, Marin, Sterling, and I sat around her glass conference table, the hum of traffic below barely audible. The email printouts lay between us, marked and annotated. "If we can find that file," Sterling said, tapping the page with a thick finger, "Victor won't have a single argument left." Marin's eyes narrowed at the text. "This part," she said, circling a faint blank space at the bottom of one email, "looks like a hyperlink that was deleted." She moved to her computer, fingers quick on the keyboard. A minute later, a hidden link reappeared, leading to a cloud directory titled simply Winterhouse. The files inside were worse than I'd imagined. A scanned contract, unsigned in the public filings, bound Victor to a limestone extraction company, granting them rights to gut Edge Hill in exchange for a staggering consulting fee routed to a Cayman account. I skimmed down to the bottom line. The second signature wasn't Victor's, it was Camille's. "Why her?" I asked. Sterling's brows furrowed. "Because she's not officially tied to the project? She's the shadow partner?" Marin leaned back. "We need a witness who can verify this isn't forged." Sterling's gaze shifted. Thoughtful. "Harlan Pierce, project manager, left after a disagreement." The name landed in my gut. Harlan and I had been close in college until one bitter argument about loyalty and money cut us off for 8 years. By nightfall, I was driving toward a small Tennessee town, the kind with one diner and a gas station that closed at 9 o'clock. Harlan answered his door with a guarded expression. Leaning against the frame, "I'm not getting dragged into your family mess," he said before I'd even explained. I pulled the printed contract from my coat pocket and held it out. He didn't take it at first, but when he read Camille's name, something in his jaw shifted. "She told me she'd ruin my career if I talked," he said finally. "She almost did." I didn't push. He stared at the paper for a long moment before handing it back. "I'll do it, but my name stays out of it until the very end." Driving back under the cold stretch of highway, I realized this wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about dismantling an entire web that had strangled more than just me for years. 1 week later, the city council chamber was packed. Rows of reporters lined the back, their cameras already aimed at the long table where Victor and Camille sat with a wall of lawyers behind them. The scent of polished wood and coffee hung in the air. I didn't take the seat at the opposing table. Instead, I sat in the public gallery 3 rows back. As if I were an observer. Let them think I'd backed off. The council chair opened the hearing with the usual formalities. Victor's attorney began to frame Edge Hill as a visionary investment. When Sterling rose, his voice calm but carrying through the room, "Before we continue," he said, "I'd like to submit a document for the record." The monitors around the chamber lit up with the Winterhouse contract. That Cayman account numbers visible in bold. A ripple moved through the room. Camille kept her chin high, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. The door at the back opened, and Harlan walked in. The council clerk introduced him as a former project manager with first-hand involvement in the internal meetings. He took the stand, swore in, and confirmed the signatures, dates, and payment arrangements. Camille spoke up, her voice sharp. "That signature was forged." Marin stood, holding up a small flash drive. "This is security footage from my office," she said evenly. "It shows you signing this contract last spring." The footage rolled on the monitors, and Camille's silence afterward was deafening. One council member leaned into his mic. "We've also received an anonymous complaint from a former employee of Mrs. Carradine that corroborates all of this." The wall seemed to close in on them. Victor's shoulders tightened. Camille looked away. I stood then, my voice steady. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to end a cycle that's damaged more than just my family. It's endangered this city's trust." Victor met my eyes. The fight in his expression was gone, replaced by something closer to resignation. The council voted unanimously to suspend the Edgehill project and initiate a full financial investigation. Security moved to escort Victor and Camille from the chamber for questioning. As the room emptied, Sterling stepped to my side, leaning just close enough. "Winterhouse is only the beginning," he murmured. "There's more if you want to keep going." Outside, Nashville's sky was a flat silver, rain falling in fine threads. I stood on the steps, the noise of the city curling around me. The battle was over,